Okay, here we go, and I'll monitor the chat.
All right, sounds great. Well, hello, everybody who's viewing this and catching up. So quick introduction for those of you that don't know me. So my name is Jolynn Torgerson. I work for Southeast Service Center. So I'm based out of Price. We cover 4 school districts, and we have, like all of you do as teachers and administrators, lots of different things we do and hats that we wear. But a huge part of what we do is just trying to provide support with tech integration in any way that comes. And it's unique for each district, and it's often unique for each teacher. So as we kind of go through this RISE, the benchmark training, if I forget to kind of plug this at the end, I'll plug it now. If there's things that you're trying to do in your classroom, or maybe you've heard of platforms or things that you want to try and implement in your classroom, you have a little bit of fear around that, please reach out to me and let's see if we can collaborate on something, or we can digitize a lesson for you, or share ideas of things that I'm seeing in other places and you're just wanting ideas. Please reach out. I'm open to meet anytime and have conversation. And so please utilize us as a resource and as a service center. So, all right, I'm going to jump in and share my screen. And kind of the goal for today, especially because this is geared towards elementary teachers, is essentially wanting you to, I think one kind of caveat I'll put at the beginning of this is that it's a little different with the youngers. And for many of them, it's a first exposure to assessment. And pretty soon they start to figure out that the word assessment and test means the same thing. And they all can kind of feel big, and it can feel a little scary and a little overwhelming. And so I hope what I touch on a little bit in this training today too, I taught in the classroom for 13 years and did 3rd grade and did 5th grade, so taught elementary. And so hopefully maybe a few of the pointers that I give will help kind of take maybe a little bit of that away by thinking about how you could thoughtfully maybe approach this with those youngers, because nobody really loves test or assessment. It kind of comes with some scary connotation mentally for all of us. So I'll try to touch on those too, especially because this is geared toward elementary students. So, all right. So for those of you that have not logged on to RISE at all, ever, maybe, or this year, it always makes you reset your password every year. So if this is your first go, don't panic. It will probably prompt you and say, hey, you need to reset your password for this year. So, and it shows you that on the bottom. You can see that right here on this slide. Just request a new one. It will send it to your school email. If you do not have an account at all, you're going to want to reach out to Shannon. Shannon will be the one that will set you up with an account. She's got privileges to do that, but get on that early, because the worst thing that can happen is you're trying to get this going and then you don't. And I guess I would say, don't make a fire for Shannon when you can deal with it way earlier than it's a fire for her and you're like trying to do it in the moment. So please just take a minute and get logged on to RISE for the year. All right. This presentation, I left the link with Shannon and Jeff. So you have access to this entire presentation. You can, look at it when you have more bandwidth or in chunks or whatever you'd like, but it's available to you. There's a lot of hyperlinks in it, and then use it as a resource to go back to when you're actually ready to do the benchmarks if you've forgotten things that you need to do. A little bit of basic information, and then I'll kind of be hopping back and forth in and out of the slideshow so that I can show you a couple things on the RISE platform. But this is a tech end part of it, but what you do need to know as a teacher is that whatever devices that you're using, they've got to have that Air Secure browser installed. Hopefully Chromebooks are ready to go. Students do not, awesome, Shannon's saying yes, they're ready. So you do not need to load anything on your end in terms of that. Tech takes care of it. What you do need to know on a Chromebook is that the students don't log in as themselves with their ID like they normally would on a Chromebook. It's an app that's at the bottom. If you're on a desktop, it should be an icon. Typically, it's an icon on the desktop, but they're not logging in underneath their specific Google account or Chrome account. There's just an app that they go to. So know that. And if you have any questions with that, again, you can reach out to me and I can walk you through that process as well. Students have test tickets. All that is shown on that test ticket is their name and their SSID. And let me grab an example of something that I did when I was in the classroom. So I didn't realize I didn't have this right here, but I do think it's worth showing, so I'm going to grab it. Their name and their SSID, usually elementary kids don't know it, especially the youngers. They've never used this number before for anything. Remember that the SSID number is not the same as their 4-digit Aspire number, but that is all they're going to need for all the tests they take for RISE all year long, right? So their name and then their SSID number. That part is the same. Every test has its own test login, but for what the student needs to know in that to get into RISE or take the test are their name and SSID number. I will show you in the presentation in just a minute how you print these test tickets. But one tip potentially if you would like to use is don't print those every time you do a benchmark or you do an interim or you do the summative at the end. I would always take those and I would print those. I'm just gonna stop presenting for just a minute so you can see this. I've got this student's name darkened out. I'll kind of hold it back here, but I would just take manila folders. I print those tickets one time, cut them out, and I actually didn't even tape them to the folder. I had a pile of folders sitting there. I had a pile of blank paper sitting there, and I had the tickets printed out. Asked every student to go over and find their own name, one folder, one piece of paper, and a strip of tape that was around the table, right? Like anything I can do. If I have 25 kids that can do it instead of me doing it 25 times, that's what you do as a teacher, I believe. So they would find their name. I'd confirm, yep, that's you. And we would just put tape right over it, right? On that ticket has their name, has their SSID number. They now have a testing folder for the entire year. However, once they've done that, you need to consider this folder as secure. And it always stays in your possession because it has personally identifiable information on it, right? It's got their SSID number, it has their name, has their birth date, but this is all they need to test, right? So if you're going to do a benchmark, you can do this one time. They've got their scratch paper. They can always have blank scratch paper in there as much as they need. That's totally fine. But when the test is over, you're like, awesome, great. Let me collect your folders back. You collect them. All you got to do is take out any old paper, securely get rid of that paper. Securely is not in your trash can right there. I suggest you shred it or whatever, but securely get rid of that. All you do is hand them their folder or throw the folders out on the table, say, find your folder, get a piece of paper, load it in, you're now ready to test again. So just a tip, when we talk about tickets, you can print them 15 times a year if you want, but this might be save you a little bit of time and headache as a teacher. So just one quick tip that I ended up really liking when I was in the classroom. Okay. All right, let's kind of pop back over here. One thing if you have never given this test before, you might get a little icon that says to allow pop-ups. You do want to allow those pop-ups. So click allow and then hit refresh. So just that little refresh button right up at the top by your Omnibox, go ahead and hit that. And then you should be good to go. That kind of lets that app work the way that it's supposed to. So don't panic. In this case, do allow the pop-ups. With the benchmark modules, we suggest that you do those in one session. And we'll talk about how many questions are on each one, things like that, but we do suggest that it is in one session. And then the process, if you get good at administering these benchmarks, you're going to feel real great going into the summative. The process is essentially the same, and so will your students. So those are, I think, another positive reason about why kind of some exposure to this also kind of lets those shoulders relax for those kids. They go, hey, I've seen this. I've done this. Okay, here we go, right? And then please keep in mind that benchmark results can give an indication of how they might perform on RISE items, but they are not predictors of summative test performance on the RISE. There's so few questions, right? So don't panic as a teacher if you give a benchmark module test and the class bombs that math one. If anything, let it inform your instruction. Make some changes. You could give it to them again, but don't panic like, oh my gosh, this means they don't know anything with this. I'm failing as a teacher. Please just always keep it in perspective about why you're doing what you're doing. How can it inform instruction? Always should be a part of what we're doing, especially when we do get feedback that is helpful. But please don't think that it is an indicator, or say that to your kids, that this is an indicator of how they're going to do at the end of the year. This is not something, we're not trying to have any fear in kids with these tests at all. I think that's really important. Okay. All right. So how do you assign a benchmark module? I'm going to pop over to another, I'm going to go right into RISE for just a minute and show you that. So To get here, you just go to Utah Rise, and you, at this point, you're not logged on to anything. You can look at resources without being logged in, but anything that says system at the top, so you'll notice the word system here. As soon as you go into anything that's within the system, it's going to ask you to log in. Okay. So I want to talk about what I think is critically important for these youngers is before you do a benchmark test, doing a training test with them. So because they're going to be like, what is this? How do I do this? You get the 50 questions, but also doing the item type tutorials with the kids as a whole class, right? Because there's different types of questions. And I think all these things will lend themselves to confidence if they know what they're supposed to do when they see a question like that. Because it's not fair to a student that what they know about something gets lost because they just don't know how to operate the system, or it feels overwhelming. That feels unfair to them. So I think, I always try to approach it with my kids of like, hey, we're going to get you ready for the game, right? We're going to get you a uniform that fits. We're going to get a basketball that's inflated. We're going to make sure the court feels really good, right? We've checked the rims or TV. This is all the stuff you do before you ever really playing a game, right? We're going to do all these things that are going to help get you ready and feel really good about what you're doing. So please, I would strongly suggest doing training tests. Training tests are right here. There's 2 ways that you can do it. So when you go to training tests, you can do either one. You can just kind of go on as a guest, or you can actually create like a test session. This kind of puts the students a little bit more through that practice of actually putting in their SSID number. Okay. So that's really the only difference between the two. You're not going to get all this data from them, which is not the point. The point of these is getting used to the system. They're also created in bandwidths, right? So you guys who have 3rd grade kids, it's going to be like a 3rd through 5th grade bandwidth. So make sure they know that, because they don't want to go in there and feel like, I don't know anything. You're like, it's probably a 5th grade question potentially, right? These are just to help students understand how to take a test. What does it look like? Comfort. Okay. So they're in with grade widths. So I would suggest definitely doing a training test. Before you even do a training test though, I'm going to go back here, and I would suggest when you go to resources, you'll notice second item down right here is item type tutorials. When you select that, you can see that it gives you, here's an edit. I would just do these on the projector over with your students together. Be like, hey, and do not do these in one setting. They will check out after 2 item type tutorials. Like do like 2 a day, right? Like just like pop one in 5 minutes after recess or 5, whatever. And just say, hey, we're going to talk about if you see a question like this, how do we do it? So for example, you can play this on the overhead, and then it will show you, it shows you how to use the tools. What is a hotspot? How does everything work? This is going to be essential, in my opinion, especially for these 3rd and 4th grade kids who they have never seen anything like this. You could go over the tutorial or have them work with a partner even, right? Like let them discover. Be like, that's another option you can do, is show them a few tutorials, and then you can go to a training test and you can say, hey, look at this with your partner. You guys can talk about it. This is not a test. I want you guys to figure out how to use the tools. Click on it, drag it, move it, see what happens. Ask a student, hey, does anybody know what this tool is? And inevitably all kids want to share. And so you're like, awesome, great. Stand up on your chair. Tell the class what you just figured out that button will do for you. And let them kind of teach each other. That's another format that you can use. And let them learn through explore and discovery, but make sure they all kind of by the end know what to do on these questions and what all the buttons do within the test. So I strongly recommend doing those item type tutorials. And there's quite a few, which also means that is a lot for kids to have to take in of how do I do this? I do also believe kids are way more intuitive than we are as adults, right? Like these kids video game and do all the things, and they're used to pushing all the buttons without any fear. Fair enough, but also make sure they understand how to answer that type of question too. It's a lot. There's no doubt that it's a lot. So consider starting with item type tutorials, and then you could do the training test. Okay. So I'm back here on the home page again, and we'll talk about assigning in just 1 minute. So again, think about item type tutorials, training tests, but then if you want to look at, you're thinking, how do I know what I want to assign? Okay. So if you go back into your resources, here is a directory of all the benchmark modules. Okay. So again, I'm not even logged in yet. Again, I just went to my resources and select what you would like to look at, right? So let's say you want to look at what modules are available for me to even assign in math. So you can download that. And what you'll notice over here is, so you see it's got the name, what does it measure, how many forms are available, and then how many questions are on each one. That's all helpful before you determine what time length do I have. Remember, we talked about best practice is to complete it in one session. Well, if you know you're planning your week and you've only got a half an hour that you want to utilize this, and I would suggest on your first one, picking one with less questions anyways, right? You're just trying to get them used to how does all this feel? And then you'll notice it's got all the standards. So if I'm a third grade teacher, you've just taught some measurement and geometry, and you want to say, hey, how are we doing with this, right? Let's see where we're at. You can use it before you teach it. And then you can give them as many times as you'd like. You can use it as a pre and post if you want to inform your instruction. One thing to note is when you see those 2 asterisks right there, all that means is that test is available to give remotely. I don't believe, Shannon, is anybody remote in the district at all right now? Okay. But if you're like, what does that mean with like Form 1, Form 2? It just means that you can give Form 1 remotely, but you can't give Form 2. You can give both of them if you're in person. Okay. So that means that for measurement and data as a third grade teacher, I have 2 options of benchmark assessments that I could give. One of them's got 10 questions. Well, they both have 10 questions and they cover a little bit different standards. Okay. So you can look at this, scroll through it, check it out. This is math for every grade. So if it was me, I'd probably make a note about which one I had given so you remember, right? But kind of look at this and maybe make some notes and decide which one you want to give, right? So then the next thing becomes, all right, so now I know, let's say you're a third grade teacher, you've decided you want to give that measurement, data, and geometry benchmark module. You'll just do the first one, right? 10 questions. The next question in my mind as a teacher would be, okay, well, what questions are on that? I want to look at the questions before I give them to my students. Great. That's your next step. So when you come back to here, now you're going to go, okay, I want to preview it. I've looked at the directory. I've got a plan about which one I think I want to assign. Now I want to look at the questions. So you're going to go into previewing. Now that you're moving into anything with system, I've already logged on, so that's why it's letting me out, but you can select your grade. So I'm going to select third grade and starting up here with science and ELA. These blue ones, keep in mind, those are Braille. So if you accidentally, or anyway, just kind of pay attention, careful to the wording. So here we are. We're going to come down here to test. Here's third grade, measurement and data, geometry 1. That's the one that you just looked at and you went, yeah, it's 10 questions. It covers the standards that I want. I want to take a look at this. You're essentially going to be looking at this test just like a student would. So you click it and then you would work through those 10 questions. You'll notice it looks just like the test does. This is what they will see. So this is a nice way for you to get a preview as a teacher before you assign it. And maybe you go through those and you're like, oh, they're not ready for this. Let me do some however you want to approach it. But it's nice that you get to see the questions before you actually assign them to the students. Okay. These are the tools we talked about before, that it's important for kids to know how they do all of this. If I highlight, will it speak to me? All those kinds of things. What do my menus mean? These are all the things you want to play with before, right? Like that's the hard stuff. If you've never done that, and then the kids getting the benchmarks, they're just click happy. And they also don't know how to use the tools the right way, right? Like talk to them about, what, can any of you have the question read to you? And they might go, I don't know. And say, yeah, you can, right? Like you can't have comprehension passages, but you can have the question read to you. If you're more of an auditory learner, have the question spoken to you. That is open for all of you to have as a resource. Why would highlighting be an important test taking strategy, right? And I think it matters that you talk to these kids even from a young age and say, what are good test taking strategies in general, right? You're going to take tests your whole life, whether you love it or not. You're going to be, how can you use good strategies to help you be successful in general? And how would highlighting apply to that, right? What do you do if you're not sure? So again, these are all the things to talk through well before the benchmarks. All right. So you can go through and take that before you see the students, or the students see it. Okay, so you've decided, yep, that's the one. Now I'm ready. I would like to assign it. I'm going to walk you through some quick start tips. You can address any of these, or if you have more questions, you can go to the TAM. This is a hyperlink to the TAM, the Test Administration Manual. It's 185 pages. We're trying to simplify it for you, but that is available to you in resources. So when you're back on that RISE page, that's one of the resources, is the Test Administration Manual. And it shows you that right there. So we just kind of explored that. I know we talked about this already. I don't believe you guys have two-factor authentication. So no worries there with that. We'll kind of buzz by that. So when you're back on that RISE platform and you would like to print test tickets, here's a screenshot of what it looks like. So you'll go to the main menu. You'll click the Tide button. That's right here. Okay, so remember, anytime you go to System, it's going to ask you to log in. So you'll click that Tide button. One of the drop downs is print test tickets, and you're going to choose to print it from a roster list. Okay, if you have an account, you'll see, you should see your students. Those are all your students are populated. They should match what's on your Aspire. Every 24 hours, that syncs with Utrex. Utrex talks to all of the platforms, including RISE. If you notice that it seems strange that you have one student on your Aspire roster and you do not have that student on your RISE roster, I would suggest one of two things before you panic and make the big phone call. First, is that student new? If they've only been there a couple of days, it may not have synced quite yet. So just give it a minute. If they have been there all year and you are not seeing a student on your roster, then reach out. Right. But definitely double check. The last thing you want is that you just assume. So always just double check your roster. A good way to do that is printing those test tickets and having the students make the folders. You can have them make the folders whenever they want. You always have the kids that want to be like teacher helpers. They could also do that at 5 minutes of recess. Right. But it lets you know that you've got all your students there. So you'll go ahead, you'll choose to print. Sometimes it will ask you to choose the school and who you are there. So you'll select that. Most elementary teachers, you're not going to have like multiple sessions of classes to choose from. So it should just be your main roster. And then once you click, so this is a little bit, I think, make sure you click that drop down arrow that's right by the print icon. And then you can print those test tickets. You'll see one of them is test tickets. That's right there. Make sure you click the blue box for whatever class that actual roster that you want to print. So you've got to click that little blue box that's right there. And then you can print. When you choose to print test tickets, it will give you options of how big do you want them to be. I've always found that smaller size that it defaults to is just fine, right? Like the kids don't need a whole page. So save a tree, print it the size that kind of defaults to, and it should work just fine. Okay, so we already kind of went over the overviews and where to find those. But again, that would be your next step, was look at those, look at your grade level, look at how many questions are on it, look at what standards it's covering, and then make your decision based on that. Further information about that you can find on page 41 to 50 of that TAM. So we're trying to give you these at least little snippets to narrow it down to in that big long TAM. You can go to page 41 to 50 where it talks specifically about the benchmark modules. So we already kind of went over. You can go there, preview, and check that out. Okay, as a teacher, I recommend that you do that so that you know what's coming your students' way. And then when you're ready to actually assign it, right? So you've done all these things. Now you're ready to assign that benchmark module. So if they've practiced the questions, they know the item types, you've previewed the module. Now you're ready to assign it. That's going to be this next one down here where it says test administration on your homepage. Okay. You will log in. You've already requested your new one, so you're ready to go. And then make sure that there's two tabs up top. One's upcoming, one is active. Make sure you're in that active yellow session, okay? You can pre-assign benchmark assessments. We're not going to get into that today. Honestly, it's super, I would say that time on the front end should be looking at the modules and knowing what you want to assign and having a plan there. And you've looked at the question, assigning it in that moment is super quick. So I wouldn't worry too much about feeling like you've got to have it, pre-assigned as an upcoming session, but you should know what you want to do. So you'll click start a new session, and then it kind of just continues to move. You make sure you click anytime you see these that you click, there's more hidden beneath them, right? You'll continue to get these drop downs essentially. Okay. Please don't make sure that you just click grade 4 in general, or every module will show up for those kids. So please make sure that you're only selecting the test that you want to give that day. And again, best practice, have it be so that they can finish that day. Don't overwhelm the kids. Give them 1 10-question benchmark, right? And maybe if you were trying to do 1 in the morning that was ELA and 1 in the afternoon that was math, fine, right? But just have it be in that session. Just choose the 1 test. You'll select it there, and then you can see at the bottom where it says to start the live RISE test session. Okay, with benchmark modules, you have to kind of give it a reason or a purpose. That you may get some guidelines from your administrator or the district on this, or you can decide, what is it for you? Is it a pre-test before you teach a unit? Post-test? Obviously, don't choose spring if it's fall, right? But have a reason for what you're choosing, and then go ahead and click OK. You can move into the next section. So you've done all of your part on your end. You're ready to go, right? So you're like, great, kids, let's go. We're going to open the secure browser. I always found that kids on Chromebooks, if you didn't tell them this before they open the browser, their first thing they want to do is log on. So say, hey, Chromebooks are closed. And let me give you something. Let me tell you what's going to happen first. When you open them, you are not going to log on. You're going to go to an app that's at the bottom. Again, remember, a lot of you guys are dealing with 3rd and 4th graders. This is all very new to them. So just say, hey, this is what we're going to do, and tell them before they hop on, right? And then they're going to go to that secure browser that's down there at the bottom. Okay, again, so they will need a test code. This is the only thing that they need that's different than their name and SSID number, which they should already have their ticket. You've done that ahead of time. Up on the board, you're going to write this test code. It's always going to start with live, LIVE dash, and then it's going to have 4 digits. Those codes are always unique to every test. You can go ahead and write that on the board. Again, make sure you erase it when you're done. Again, don't ever write SSID numbers. Those are considered secure, personally identifiable information. There's that live number. This is what you see on your screen, right? So that's what you would put up there on the board, okay? You can also, I believe, if it hasn't changed, I think you can even click that and even project the code if you want to on your projector. But again, make sure nothing is on your screen that is personally identifiable to any student. All right, so let's talk about kind of the rules and procedures to this. On page 59 of the TAM, it gives you specific instructions that you should read when you are administering any kind of assessment, even if it's the benchmark, okay, and the summative. And so often, and I was in that same camp where you feel a little weird about it as a teacher, right? It feels very robotic. It doesn't make sense to the students. And sometimes I think I almost felt like, man, it makes it feel so stressful to my students. I don't want to do that. I can paraphrase it. It's fine, right? Like the kids get the idea. Oh, they've done this a bunch of times, they're 6th graders now. They've heard it all before. I'm just going to say, you guys know what to do, right? Start the test when you're done, right? It matters that you do it. And you've also signed an ethics training that tells you that I understand I need to do this. And I understand, and I've agreed to that as a teacher. And I think you take a minute before you even jump into the benchmarks or the test. And I think it matters that you tell the students why you're doing it, because then it doesn't feel so weird to them. So I would say to my students, hey, some of these things that we're doing, what's cool about this is that students all across the state are doing the same thing, which is pretty cool, right? And it lets us all kind of, lets the state look at data everywhere and see how great we're doing and see areas that we can improve. And I get to do the same thing as a teacher. So when we do this, though, one thing that makes it fair for all the kids across the state is that as teachers, we all kind of have to say the same thing so that the experience is the same for everybody. It doesn't put anybody at a disadvantage or at an advantage. So I'm going to do the same thing as a teacher in Salt Lake is going to do, as a teacher in St. George is going to do, as a teacher in Navajo Mountain is going to do. We're all going to do the same thing. So that's why I'm reading the instructions. So whenever we take a test, you'll hear me kind of say, hey guys, okay, now we're starting the test and I'm going to have to give some specific instructions and I'm going to read them. It might sound a little robotic, but it's cool. We got this. Right. And then they're like, okay. Then when they hear you start reading scripted instructions, they already know. It doesn't feel weird to them. And it becomes a part of what you do with this. So I believe if you give them the why and you don't make it weird, it's not weird for the students either. But you do need to do it. It's not a suggestion from the state. You've signed an ethics form. So please just honor that and honor that experience for the kids and that it matters. Okay. So, and they're simple. They're not hard instructions, and they're on page 59. There's a link right to it right there. So it's not hard to get to. We're trying to make it as easy as we can for you as teachers or proctors. Okay. Remind students when they get to a certain point, they're going to put in their name. They're going to put in their SSID, and then teach them, hey, always check and make sure that that's you. Maybe they thought they put their SSID number in and they're 1 digit off. Well, that is going to pull up some student from Richfield instead on accident. Make sure that one, on your screen, you have to approve all students. So one, make sure before you approve them that it truly is a student sitting in your room, and then teach them to look too and make sure it shows their name on the computer and it shows their birth date and it shows their school that they're assigned to. So just make sure that all of you, it's just kind of an easy thing to check and make sure things are good. They'll go ahead, they'll take the test. When they come to the end, they'll click finish. Teach them to make sure they've taken the time to review questions before they submit. That's, again, good general test taking strategy. There is, I think you talked to them heavily before about this. This is not a race. There is no winner for finishing in 5 minutes. In fact, you'll probably get the teacher glare from me, right? So teach them about middle road timing and time management, right? It should not take you 2 hours. We're not staring at our screen and thinking about, what we're going to have for snack after school, but we're also not just clicking through because we just want to get done and we don't care. And so teach them strategies with that. Once they're done, and everybody's done, on your screen, there's a big stop and you can just click stop. It will end the test. That will end it for all students once they're done. One thing I did forget to mention that I would suggest taking time on the front end too, and you can do this within those practice assessments, but it gives them the opportunity to check the rate and the speed and what type of voice they want to listen to. As a teacher, you can decide how much flexibility you want to give to that. The younger the kids are, the less flexibility I give them at all with rate or speed. However, consider saying, hey, I don't care if you listen to a male voice or a female voice. If you like one better than the other, great, make your choice. But then what I would have them do is on that folder, I would have them mark, I like the Ava voice, or I like the Mark voice. And I'm like, great, you heard them all. You made your choice. And I have them, the reason I have them write it down is because inevitably kids will be like, I can't remember what I liked. I don't know what and you're like, oh, it's on your folder. And they're like, oh, okay. And it eliminates that. And you don't have to do it every single time and have it be an issue. It's like getting it out, getting all the bugs out, and then letting them, and they have some choice, and then they already know it, and so do you, right? So tell kids, they always want to know how they do, okay? They are not going to see a score on their screen. You will get those results. You'll be able to access those on your reporting screen on Rise in about 24 hours. I do think it matters you share those with kids, right? Like when you get a moment, pull them up and say, hey, let's look at how you did, right? And we're always talking about growth. Obviously, you're doing these at the beginning of the year. Talk with kids about, hey, here's a couple that you got right. Let's look at these couple that you missed. Can you identify maybe what it might have been, or maybe talk to me about your thinking there, and let them kind of talk through and almost problem solve themselves and be like, hey, you're going to do great on the next one, right? Make it a super positive experience for them and discuss growth as much as you can. And if you have kids who go to, or they're assigned to different teachers for whatever reason, or maybe they have a different teacher for math or language arts, or you have special ed teachers who also get to the privilege of working with these kids in your room, they can also see the results for these students. So just keep that in mind as well. They can view them on the reporting dashboard. Couple other resources and teaching strategies just for you to consider so that help prepare them. Are here, and you can kind of think about that. I honestly think being open and honest with kids about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how it is a part of school, and having a really positive attitude about it yourself, I feel like reflects in the room and reflects with your students. And so keep that in mind too. We can do all things to prep them, but if we walk in and we're like, oh, I have to do these daunting things. Guess what? That's exactly how your kids will feel. If you're like, hey, we get to create a nice baseline today. And I am stoked to see what your growth is going to be when we keep doing these, you guys. It's going to be awesome. You're going to love to see how much you grew. They will feel that energy. So please think about that as you are going about this. Any questions, things that you have? Shannon Dusab is your assessment director, and she's amazing. It has been awesome to work with me. Feel free to reach out to her or to me if you are a new teacher and this is the first time you're doing this, or maybe you taught a different grade. Maybe you're a second grade teacher for 20 years and now you're in third grade and you're a little panicked because you didn't have to do any of these assessments before. And you would like a walkthrough of the system. You're just feeling like a little overwhelming. You're like, yeah, I could get on Rise and it might take me 2 hours to sort it out myself. Or you can reach out to me. I'm happy. We can do it like a 15-minute tutorial and it's one-on-one and it gives you some time back. I would love to do that and be a resource. So please feel free to reach out any way that I can to support you in all of this. There's a lot on your plate. And so I would love to be a resource in any way that I can with these things. So yeah, that's kind of hopefully kind of the main quick view of what are benchmarks, how do I access them, how do I know what's on them, and then how do I help prepare my students to be successful. Those were kind of my goals of what I wanted you to know today. So Shannon, can you think of anything else you'd like us to touch on? Or
No, I think you did a good job. We so appreciate you, Jolynn, and your dedication to helping us out and giving us your time. So thank you so much. I think this is fabulous. This was great. It was a great refresher, and I felt like it was great for the new people who might be new to this too. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. And if you, like I said, my contact information is on those slides, which they'll share out. You can also reach out to Shannon knows how to get a hold of me. We can also share a link where you can directly schedule a meet or a phone call with me. If you'd rather do a phone call instead of a meet, we can do any of those anytime. So please reach out, and not just with assessment. Like I would love to help out in any ways that I can that are tech related. And if I don't know the answer, I will try to tap into resources that I have and get you an answer. So
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Jolynn.
Thanks, Shannon.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. I just stopped.
Perfect.
Well, now